Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our public lecture series. Thank you for being patient with us. Had some technical difficulties. Even after several years now with COVID, there's always some issues that we run into. So today I'd like to introduce Cindy Roberts, who's a former staff biologist at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium and a polar bear conservationist. So she is been wonderful and stepping in last minute replacement for our talk today. So I really just want to first show my appreciation for Cindy for stepping in and having us learn about polar bears. So Cindy recently retired after zookeeping for 21 years. She's based in Tacoma, Washington. There, she was a polar bear keeper, educator, field ambassador for Polar Bears International. And she's also the founder of the Point Defiance AAZK chapter's annual Party for Polar Bears, which raised over $33,000 for polar bear conservation to date. So, without further ado, Cindy, please go ahead and you may begin.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's wonderful to meet all of you. And I wanted to take a different approach to my talk today. And I wanted to tell you the secret side of zookeeping. I think a lot of people have in their mind what zookeepers do, but I wanted to give you a behind the scenes look of what life really is like as a zookeeper. Sorry, now I'm having technical difficulties. Great. Thank you so much. So, the first thing that you think of when you think of a zookeeper is that we scoop poop. And yes, we do scoop a lot of poop. We feed animals where you smell like fish all day, every day, even after we take a shower. So, that is just one part of our job. As I'm sure you could imagine, the other part is that we get to work with cute animals. In my career, I've had the opportunity to work with a diverse amount of animals, and it has been such a pleasure to do that. I've had the joy of working with fish, invertebrates, sharks, beluga whales, Pacific walruses, harbor seals, sea otters, California sea lions, Magellanic penguins, tufted puffins and common murres, Arctic foxes, and of course, polar bears. And it has just been the most incredible adventure of my life. I wanted to give you an inside look to what zookeepers do in many aspects. So sometimes we come into work at 6 a.m. to weigh out all the food and prepare the food for the many different species we have. We also give care, medical care for all of our animals, whether it's a puffin who's a pound and a half up to a 1,200-pound polar bear. And we want to provide the very best care for each and every animal. So if you look at the bottom right, you can see me there weighing a common murre. So we do training with all of our animals from our puffins up to our bears, and we train them to mentally and physically stimulate them, but we also train them to help us take care of them. So you can see our common murre here is getting weighed and gets on the scale all by himself and gets rewarded for it. And we pretty much do this for all our animals so we can keep really good track of their health and their diet. We also administer medications that are prescribed by our veterinarians, again, from a little 1-pound puffin up to a 1,000-pound polar bear. And lastly, people don't probably really know that we work very closely with our veterinary team because we see the animals every day and we work closely with them and get to participate in medical procedures. So if you look at the top left photo, you will see a horned puffin getting a CAT scan. And it's pretty impressive that a little tiny puffin, they would put that much effort into a CAT scan. And that just speaks for the work that our vet staff does for our animals. So let's get more into polar bear stuff now. So polar bear keeping duties are a lot different. You're working in a secured area, you're working with apex predators, and this is a very mentally and physically demanding job. So as you saw the common murre getting trained to kind of keep track of their weight, you can see in the top left corner of Blizzard here, and I'm asking him to open his mouth. Now he is a large apex predator, and I cannot make him do anything. So I can ask him for behaviors, and if he's not interested, he's not interested. We use only positive reinforcement training. And so if he's having a day he doesn't feel like doing it, we're not going to push him or punish him. We might ask him for a different behavior he does want to do and reward him for it. But this particular behavior we use to look at his teeth, but we also once was able to try to get a flu test from him. One day he was coughing and sneezing. We'd never seen anything like that from him. And so he was the perfect bear, and he held completely still for a giant Q-tip to be rubbed up in his cheek. And it was really cool to see how well our work with him and our training with him was paying off. So you can see we also do cleaning, which is a typical day for a keeper. If you can see in the right hand photo, I am offering a bone to Blizzard for him to chew on as some enrichment. In the bottom left corner is Boris. He was our older bear. He was showing signs of age-related health issues. And it's a really important part of our job to make sure he's getting his medication, whether it's the right dosage, the right amount of pills, to make sure he's eating them and not spitting them out. Sometimes we have to use some little tricks, and some of his favorite foods were like frosting and marshmallows to sneak those pills in. And lastly, of course, to be involved in these incredible medical procedures and get to stand next to our veterinary team and work right beside them is such a privilege and an honor, and I've learned so much from it. So let's talk about the bears at Point Defiance Zoo. So this is Blizzard, and he's going to be the bear that we're most focused on today. And he is now currently the only bear residing at Point Defiance. He is 26 years old. He will be 27 years old this December. And he weighs anywhere from 950 pounds. In the early year in February, he's way more active. He's swimming and playing versus in the late fall when he's 1,200 pounds, laying around, not swimming as much. But there's a wide range of weights for him. So you see this cute picture on the right of Blizzard when he came to us as a cub. So he came from Churchill, Manitoba, which is Canada, the polar bear capital of the world. We'll be talking quite a bit about that today. And he was separated from mom at a young age. And these guys tend to stay with mom till they're about 2.5 years old. So he would not have made it on his own. At the time he came in 1997, I was actually volunteering at the zoo. So I've known him since he was a cub, and he has a very special place in my heart. And he's just an incredible bear. I couldn't go without introducing Boris. We lost Boris in 2020 at the age of 35 years old. The average lifespan of a polar bear is 25 years old. So he lived a long life, but his beginning years were very difficult. He has a very interesting story. He was born in a German zoo in 1985. And somehow, we don't exactly know how, he ended up in a German circus. And that is pictured on the right. This is not probably a picture with Boris, but it shows you what he was doing in the circus. And that tiny woman there, her name is Ursula. And she loved these bears madly. And if she thought anyone wronged these bears in any way, she would fire them immediately. Her husband was actually killed by a polar bear, and she was mauled 3 times by a polar bear, and she continued to work with bears. But in 1989, East and West Germany unified, and Eastern Germany owned the circus and disbanded. And sadly, they sold all of the bears, and I recently found out that some of the bears were sold for food, which I can't imagine how Ursula must have felt losing her bears. And the other bears were sold to a Mexican traveling circus. And Boris and also our other bear, Kenny, were 2 bears that lived in that circus for many years. Now, Boris came to us with Kenny in 2002 after being confiscated from the circus. And he's lived out his life getting the best quality food after in the circus eating lettuce and bread, dog food, and occasionally fish. And him and Kenny also got to enjoy natural, cool seawater 24 hours a day for the rest of their life. So we're really, really proud of the care we gave him, and it really speaks for him living to be 35 years old. So I mentioned Boris to you, one, because he's a very special ambassador for wild polar bears, but also he was the first polar bear to receive an experimental form of a stem cell treatment. Dr. Karen Wolf on the left is our lead veterinarian at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, and she met Dr. Johnson, Valerie Johnson, at a conference and heard her talking about stem cell therapy in animals. And because Boris was showing those signs of age-related arthritis, inflammation, and discomfort, she got the idea that we should try this on Boris. And Dr. Valerie flew from Colorado, and she took blood from Boris, and she put it in a cooler, flew back to Colorado, and for the next 4 weeks, she grew out 10 billion cells. So this right bottom picture, I absolutely adore. This is Boris's cells. Boris was a very, very special bear to me. So it's a really neat picture to have. After 4 weeks later, she grew out those cells. She put those cells in a cooler. In the middle of the night, she went to the airport, got on a plane to meet us at the zoo early in the morning, and Boris was already anesthetized, and she put those cells back into Boris. Now, although the results were not remarkable, we still saw an improvement in Boris with his movements, his walking, his pain. And it really speaks for the fact that he lived to be 35 years old. And it was really incredible to be a part of this experience. And hopefully this treatment will kind of change as medicine modernizes, and hopefully can help other bears and zoos that are ambassadors for their wild counterparts. But maybe someday it can help wild bears as well. So I didn't mention Glacier earlier, but Glacier was another bear that was rescued from Churchill at the same time as Blizzard. They were both born the same year. They both were separated from their moms, and they both wouldn't have made it on their own. So they both came to us back in 1997. So about 2014, we noticed some changes in Glacier. These guys hide it when they're sick. So sometimes it can be hard to tell when they're not feeling well. But Glacier started having appetite loss. He was really lethargic, and he was a really active, spunky bear. And he was losing weight, and we had some concern for him. So we did a procedure, and after two or three procedures, it actually took a while because we'd never dealt with his illness before. It was determined that he was diagnosed with liver cancer and also heart disease. His heart was not working properly, and his liver, of course, wasn't either. So once again, Dr. Karen and her team decided that they were going to try chemotherapy for his liver cancer. They used IV chemotherapy. They did it every 4 weeks. And then you see the amount of medicine, and that is the pills he received. That's 1 time a day, and he actually received those pills twice a day. And they did include chemotherapy pills and heart medication. So on the left is a picture of him in a CT scan, and this is very unique, and this was very special in that we were able to find a human CT scan machine that fit Glacier. Our other bears would not have fit in this machine, and he barely fit, but he was a much smaller bear, ranging from 750 to 950 pounds. So having this opportunity allowed us to see what was going on with his cancer, and if the chemotherapy was helping it to go away, or if there were changes. What we found, and our vets found, is that the cancer has spread to his lungs. So that was unfortunate news for us. But we kept going on, trying to give him the best life and give him comfort, and trying to see if we could combat this liver cancer. So about 9 months later, he passed away. And this is the ugly part of zookeeping. You have to do a necropsy with the vet staff. And this is ways for us to learn about how we can take better care of him, And also sometimes it can help wild polar bear researchers with some of the samples. But what we found is that his liver cancer did not go away. In fact, his liver ended up weighing with the tumor about 56 pounds, but the cancer in his lungs had gone away. So even though it didn't turn out exactly how he hoped, Glacier really helped us to learn about cancer and how we can help other bears in the future. And I'm sad to tell you that Blizzard was just recently diagnosed with liver cancer himself. And it is very prevalent, not only in polar bears, but all bears and also dogs. So Glacier really helped us with that. And our vet team was extraordinary in coming up with some of these great treatments. Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards. Another aspect of our job that has really come out to be more part of our job, about 40% of our job in the last few years, is educating our zoo visitors, educating our communities. And it's something that I am passionate about and I love. So my zoo has been extremely supportive in me doing work with education. In the top left, you can see me at an assembly at an elementary school with almost 800 children. On the right, I am at a community science event teaching kids about climate change and how they can make a difference, and letting them get to talk to different scientists and some of the work they do to help save polar bears and the Arctic sea ice and other Arctic animals for that matter. On the bottom left is Boris and Blizzard, and that's me doing one of the hundreds of scheduled talks we did with zoo visitors every day. But we are out on the front line with our animals, and we take every opportunity that we can get to talk to these people, whether it's a small family or a larger group. And we spend every moment that we're not caring for our animals, educating people about our animals and helping them to get really excited and enthusiastic about helping us to save the earth for us and them. And on the right, my most proud moment was on Earth Day during the pandemic. Lester Holt from NBC interviewed me about Blizzard and polar bears, and it was really an incredible experience. Another way that we get to be involved, and this is a big secret, is that many times our facilities will pay us and support us in going to do field work. And going on this trip to the Arctic in Churchill, Manitoba, changed my life. And it sounds dramatic, but it is absolutely so true. It was the most amazing experience of my life. So I went with Polar Bears International as a field ambassador. And in the left, you can see flying over the Arctic, which just brought me to tears because I never dreamed ever that I would get to go to the Arctic. And on the right is the Churchill Airport. Now you can see in comparison to that small plane, how small the airport is. Churchill, you can only get in either by plane or train, and that's it. Those are your only options. This is how you get to Churchill. A lot of people want to know where Churchill is, and it's just easier to show you on a map. So you can fly to the US to Winnipeg. You spend the night in a hotel. You get up at 2 a.m. and you take a Calm Air flight to Churchill. And it's really from Winnipeg only about an hour and 50 minutes to Churchill. It's not that long. Actually, the whole trip really isn't that long. I wanted to show you this map to kind of give you a better idea of Churchill and why it's so an important part of polar bears. So you can see where the Churchill Airport is, and the town of Churchill is only 800 people, and there's 800 polar bears living in the surrounding areas. This area is really important because the polar bears go out on the tundra in summer, and they wait for the sea ice to return because the sea ice in this region goes away in the summers. But in the winter, when it forms, it is the first place that the sea ice returns. The reason that is to the arrows on the left, that is fresh water from the Churchill River, and it's going down flowing into Western Hudson Bay. And the currents there mix it in with the seawater, and fresh water forms before seawater, So that is the first place in the region that sea ice forms. And so in October, when the polar bears are getting really hungry after not eating all summer, they will start moving towards the shores. So sometimes they're going through town to get to the shores to wait for that sea ice to return. So this area is a place where many polar bear researchers work. Visitors from all over the world come to see wild polar bears. And also this was an opportunity for me to share my knowledge and all my passion for polar bears. What does a field ambassador do? So as a field ambassador, I am teaching visitors around the world about Polar Bears International, and I'm also tying in my work as a zookeeper with polar bears to wild polar bears. So on the left, you see the Polar Bears International House. We actually call it the PBI House. It was constructed and opened in 2019. So it was the first time that the building was open, and I had the privilege of working in there. This is on the main street in Churchill, and it's a small street, but it's where all the visitors and tourists come. They have some lunch or dinner, they buy some gifts, and they'll stop in to this house, and it's an interpretive center, and we do about a 20-minute tour with them, teaching them all about polar bears. On our other days, we get to go out with Frontiers North. They collaborate very strongly with Polar Bears International, allowing these field ambassadors to go out in the field with the tundra buggies and the tourists to tell our stories. And I'm going to show you what it looks like on the tundra buggy now. But first, we're going to see, this isn't the best video, but I wanted you to see what the PBI house looks like. It's a small building, but it has beautiful graphics, and it makes a great statement for our tourists who come in. We get to have a close and personal talk with them, tell them our stories about being out on the tundra, working with polar bears. We have these different stations that we go to and spend a little time talking with them on each station. So this day was a very exciting day. They were having a party to celebrate the opening of the PBI house. There's explore.org where you can follow the live polar bears, and staff and volunteers were preparing for a big event that night while I was videoing instead of preparing so that I could show you guys this later. So there's the PBI house. Here we are out on the tundra buggy. It's like a big bus. It has a bathroom. It has a heater. People can take pictures out the window securely. And this was an opportunity for me to get to meet all these incredible people who are passionate about bears, and their faces would just light up when they would see a wild polar bear. And it was my opportunity to share my passion, asking them not to idle their cars to help polar bears. So I want to give you a sneak peek into some of the amazing polar bear opportunities we had out there. So these were two male young polar bears, and they were practice sparring. So they will practice for years to come until they are old enough to reproduce at about 8 years of age. The thing that I learned in 2019 is, if you guys noticed, you did not hear a sound out of them when they were sparring. So in movies, they oftentimes put a growling sound, but it was perfectly quiet in that video, except for the clicks you hear from the cameras. And they got a little overheated after they had this play sparring session, and they dug what's called a day bed into the snow, curled up and cooled off. And this will help them structure they're in when they become a grown male. I also just love sharing my pictures and wanted to give you an inside look. This was the first time I ever saw polar bear cubs in the wild. It brought tears to my eyes, and also the other guests that were with me. And it was just such an amazing experience getting to see cubs. And then on top of that, I got to see a female nursing her cub. Here's a polar bear stretching it out, and you can see he's on the coast waiting for that sea ice to return, and he still has about another month to wait. This was a young female cub. We think she was younger because her neck's a little thinner, and she was romping in the snow, and it was just such a joy to watch her. There's her cute little polar bear feet. Again, we go back to education. I take every opportunity I can to share my love of polar bears. So when I was in Churchill, I did a Skyping session with Arlington Elementary School in Tacoma, Washington, and I was at the PBI house doing it. And I taught them the polar bear wave, and we teach them about saving our sea ice for polar bears. Let's talk more about polar bears so you can understand them a little bit better. So polar bears are found in the Arctic, and they are found in 5 countries. So the US, Alaska, Canada, which has the largest population of about 65% of the world's polar bears, Russia, Greenland, and Norway. There's about 25 to 26,000 polar bears in the world. It's hard to count them all. They're out in the middle of the Arctic, but we have a good idea of what their numbers are. In the US, polar bears are on the threatened list, and they have been since 2008. So of these 5 countries, there's 19 populations. And as you can see, they have an idea that some are doing well, some are stable, and some of are a great concern. You see the ones in red, and you'll see lower down below where it says WH, that is Western Hudson Bay and Churchill. And that is a big concern. This is a southern part of the Arctic. It is actually the subarctic. And because they don't have that sea ice in the summer, they're having longer and longer summers. And so it is a big concern that those populations are decreasing without that sea ice. Sea ice is life for polar bears, and polar bears rely on sea ice for their hunting platform. So this polar bear will be waiting for several more weeks before the sea ice returns. And here she is just waiting there. If you look just to the right of her, you can see she's made a day bed. They call it a day bed. So she digs out a hole and she will curl up in that hole, he or she, and that protects them from the bitter cold wind. So in Hudson Bay, as I've mentioned, it melts in the summer. So these guys can eat anything. They can eat kelp, they can eat berries, they can eat leaves off of trees, they can eat trash. But what they have to survive, to thrive, to reproduce is they have to have seal blubber. And so they are going longer and longer periods during the summer where they don't have sea ice. When I was there in 2019, we had counted up to 140 days they had gone without eating. Imagine if they closed our grocery stores. It's kind of the same impact. And what's more important than this is females must have at least 33% more weight on them in order to reproduce. Otherwise, they just won't reproduce. So it's really important for them. Sea ice is everything to them. In talking about their food and if they can chase food, this particular video came to mind. Can they chase food? They can chase food, but what happens is when they run, they have 3 layers protecting them from the cold. They can withstand temperatures of 50 degrees below zero. When they run, they use so many calories that whatever they eat, they won't make up those calories. So in this particular slide, if you look in the up left, that is a male. And when males are hungry enough, sadly, they will eat cubs. And mom knew that this was a threat to her 2 cubs. And so she ran away. So I'm going to show you this video before I say more. So I couldn't get a good shot of the male, but he was not far behind her, and we were all very worried for mom and cubs. So what happens is when they run, mom hasn't eaten for almost a whole year. She denned up in November, last November. Her cubs are almost a year old, not quite. She gave birth, she nursed them, and she continues to nurse them, and she has not had a meal since they left the den because the ice is already starting to break up. So she has not a lot of fat, and her cubs, because they're nursing, they don't have any fat yet. So by running away from this male, they're using a lot of calories. And this is a perfect illustration of how that can impact them. Polar bears eat beard and ringed seals. The picture on the right is a bearded seal. And this is a polar bear on the sea ice. Now, these guys are lazy hunters because they have to save energy any way they can. So they'll wait on the sea ice, sometimes up to 48 hours. They'll wait near a seal breathing hole, wait for the seal to pop up. They'll grab their heads with their big jaws and crush their skull, drag them out on the sea ice. They'll eat the blubber and leave the rest, as you can see here on this picture. So they eat seal blubber, and that's what they have to have because it's high calorie, it's high fat and protein, but also when they digest it, they use very little energy. And also a byproduct of digesting that is fresh water. So imagine they're out on the sea ice all winter, they have no access to fresh water. So by digesting that blubber, they get seawater just like that. It's very cool. So here's the big secrets that I'm excited to share with you today. We collaborate with many polar bear researchers that work with polar bears in the wild. And it's been a very incredible ride the last few years, working with my polar bear partner at work, Sheridan. We're co-workers and we've worked on all these projects together. And we're going to talk about some of those today. This was my first kind of chance at getting to do research, and it was very exciting, even though it was a small project. So Borgmo, and I'm not sure if I'm even saying his name right, we communicated only over email because he lives in Norway, and he was studying polar bears. And what he wanted to do was learn how to identify wild polar bears individually. So I don't know if you can look at my pictures, but I know Boris and Blizzard apart by, without even blinking, I can tell them apart. So he asked us to take photos of our bears, and you can see on the left, he had certain kind of positions that he wanted the bears in for IDing. So there were a number of days that a number of pictures were taken for each bear. They were logged, numbered, and sent in an Excel spreadsheet. And what we found out is that his research project was successful. It allowed them to be less invasive in working with the bears, and they could be further away using a zoom lens to take pictures. So we were able to help him with his project with the photos, but we were able to get him in touch with other facilities that could also take pictures and help him. So it's all of us working together, and it's all for polar bears. Next was a hair growth study, and this is very special to me. It's very close to my heart. We worked with Jenny Stern, who's a polar bear researcher from the University of Washington, and she wanted to learn about polar bear hair growth. So we know polar bears' hair growth grows twice a year. They molt twice a year, but we don't know for how long. We don't quite know. We have an idea, but we don't exactly know if their hair grows all year. And she wanted to find out what else we could use from this hair growth study. And what she found out was that we could understand nutrition of polar bears, reproduction, and also contaminant exposure. Anything we do with research, whether it's photos, giving our bears any oral isotopes or medications, or even dye, have to go through an animal welfare committee and also through our veterinary team. So all of this was done prior to starting this research project. So we were going to dye Blizzard's back rear end, but before we could do that, a few weeks before, he had to receive an isotope marker. So you can see the capsules on the left, and you see our other little secret. He loves marshmallows. So he got some marshmallow treats to get his isotope markers. Jenny came back a few weeks later, and she prepared the dye. This was human dye, so we didn't know how it was going to work on a polar bear fur, which is hollow. And you can see Sheridan and I having a zen moment, kind of taking a breath. We were really excited, and we were really anticipating if this was going to work, if we're going to be able to get the dye on if Blizzard was going to be an amazing bear, which he was. And it was pretty incredible first time at dyeing him. So here is a sneak peek at behind the scenes, seeing how we did some training to kind of practice. You will see me using a brush. We were practicing here. We were desensitizing him to the brush, but even more so, we had to get him used to the strong smell of the dye. So excuse the background noise and us kind of chatting with each other, trying to prepare, because we don't talk to each other when we're asking them for the behavior, as you'll see. Oops. Let's go back here and try this again. Sorry. Oh. So that's the end of our video. Sorry, I heard that you were not hearing the sound, but it's actually really quiet. Thank you for pointing that out to me. We're usually pretty quiet when we're doing a training session. We want to keep us calm, to be honest, and also Blizzard. Sorry. So here is the outcome of our dye. It was much bigger than we expected. It was much more purple. The dye was supposed to be black. In the middle slide, you can see we didn't quite get to the roots. So a few weeks later, we had to dye him again. And in the final sample on the right, you can see we finally got down to the roots because she wanted to see the new hairs growing in and be able to compare the growth. And here's Jenny processing our samples. She had to burn the hairs to find the markers, and the process changed as she went along. It was kind of a little bit frustrating, but she did get it figured out. And you can see on the right, she was really excited when she actually found new hairs growing and mixed in within the dyed fur. We had to do it again in a few months and dye him again because the dye wore off, and this was a 2-year project. This time we tried a few new things. So we tried using syringes, which got down to the roots. It was faster, it was cleaner. And I don't know if you guys are able to see all the pictures, but there's a picture on the right. We tried a new technique for trying to video what we were doing also. So you can see this dye, although still a little messy, this dye patch looks much nicer. And the photo on the bottom is Jenny and Sheridan and I with Blizzard. And this was on our last day of the project after 2 years working together. Jenny's now a really dear friend. It was an incredible project, and I'm very happy I got to be a part of it. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Polar Bears International Boron Fur Project. So in the hair growth study and also on this project, we were the pilot programs for this project. It was an honor to kind of figure out how this thing's work and be able to share it with our other facilities that we worked with. So Polar Bears International uses bear trackers. On the female bears, they use a collar, and it will stay on and it will fall off by itself in a few months. Male bears, their head and neck are the same size and the collars fall off. So they had to use an ear tracker. But Polar Bears International wanted to come up with something less invasive and that would be more useful to them. And I have this video that I want to play for you because they can better explain it. But I'm going to have you guys let me know if you can hear it. So give me just a minute here to share this with you. No sound? Let me see if I can quickly optimize the sound. Okay, let's try it again. Thank you everyone for your patience.
So keeping things attached to bears is particularly hard. So we're often
Wonderful.
asked, why do you tag and track polar bears or wildlife in general? Tracking gives us a ton of information on habitat use, where animals go and what they're doing when we can't see them. An animal like a polar bear, most of their life history occurs out of sight. They live in very remote places, out on the sea ice where it's quite difficult to get to and nearly impossible to get to in the dark winter months. Having devices that remotely give us information on what a polar bear or other wildlife might be doing is incredibly valuable.
The challenge came to us through my son. My son works for Polar Bears International, and he reached out to me one day and he's going, "Dad, we have a problem. We need to attach a tag to a polar bear. You work for a company that makes things stick. Can you help us make a tag stick to a bear?"
Recently, tags and transmitters for bear research or research in general on animals have been shrunk down. They're quite small now. We really need a better tool in order to attach these to the animal itself. Polar Bears International is working with 3M to work and look at, is there better adhesives, maybe some sort of Velcro-like tool, or maybe a tape that could adhere this to the animal for a short amount of time. And then when the tag has outlived itself, the adhesive will simply let go and the tag will be released from the animal.
From there, I turned around and went to our tech forum community. I said, can we figure out a way to do this? I put together an event we called the Tagabear Challenge. It was a creative event to invite people for the couple of days to brainstorm and come up with some solutions.
Here's a polar bear pelt. This is when they molt. This is how long we need this little tag to stick to the bear. Now, what can you guys do?
And then from there, we went into solving those problems, developing test methodologies, and it's been about a 2-year process. Over that time, we came up with several solutions, and we've reduced it down to essentially 4 methodologies. Some of them are adhesive methodologies, some are mechanical methodologies, and some are hybrids of both of those.
Everything we know right now about polar bears is from adult female movements, so we're missing a big chunk of the information on how other bears use habitat, how other bears move around in the subpopulation and potentially between subpopulations. So if we're successful in testing these fur tags, if they work on polar bears, it will allow us for the first time to track adult male polar bears and subadult polar bears. These tags could potentially go on bears of any size. So this will give us a lot more information on polar bear life history, and it'll really round out what we know about polar bear habitat use and how things are changing as sea ice continues to melt.
This has really been a demonstration of the best of 3M. It's what has been really exciting for me about my career here. It's a challenge that I put out to the technical community, and there are a group of folks that have embraced this and have helped to come up with solutions and are just as excited about it as I am. The intent is to provide the wildlife community with a platform for attaching tags, radio tags, to these animals and be able to track them.
Arctic and polar bears provide for some really interesting challenges and unanswered questions. I'm excited to look for new ways to use this tool to try to fill in some of the gaps and provide answers to some of those questions.
Polar bears live throughout the Arctic,
Sorry,
where they make
guys.
a living by hunting seals on the surface of the sea.
Uh-oh. Bear with me. Sorry, everybody. It started going on my regular computer. Sorry about that. Thanks for bearing with me. So we chose at Point Defiance to use the mechanical version with the crimps. It's the one circled in the middle. You can also see the 2 other types. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. Try this one more time. How's that? Okay, let me go back. So here is the mechanical tracker that we chose with crimps on it. The first time we did it, we realized that they were using a pelt with long hair, and where we were told to place it, the hair was really short. So we had to make a little bit of an adjustment to that, and it took us quite a while to figure out how to put it on him and get the crimps in place. You can see that the tool we used had a hard time reaching the crimp between the trackers, so that was something that we mentioned to them. So on our first attempt, he was looking good. You guys can see the circled trackers. And 24 hours later, it fell off. Now, some people might think this is a failure, but to me, it was still a success because we learned from it. And also they need to know if he loves to rub in his wood wool. So you see on the left, it fell off in his wood wool bed. And that's something they need to know is, are they going to be able to brush up against it? So in the middle picture, what you can see is the material didn't hold. His hair still had the crimps in it. That's how strong his hair was, but the material was not able to hold that. So the picture on the right was trying to show you there were still crimps in his hair, but of course, with all that fur, it's hard to see. So a few months later, after they came up with a new material with a little bit wider mesh for the tracker, we tried again. And this time, and I wanted to mention to you guys, when we put these trackers on, we are not doing it, we're not anesthetizing him just to put a tracker on. These were both opportunities for us to do medical procedures. As I told you, we were in the process of diagnosing him with liver cancer. And so this was an opportunity. We had to add the tracker in, and it's not invasive in any way. But we lost the tracker after a week, and our staff went to every length to find it, including Maggie, who got in the trash bin, and went through all the trash to try and find it. Eventually, as you see on the right, about 2 days later, we found it in the polar bear pool. And on the bottom photo, you can see the mesh held up beautifully. This time, our crimps were not strong enough. So again, it may seem like a failure, but we learned a lot from it. So here's the secret about being a zookeeper. We wear mustaches at Halloween. We make snow cone snow bears for our bears. We give our polar bears some cupcake treats. And here's Jenny and I, the polar bear researcher in Churchill. Coincidentally, we ended up in Churchill together and had the time of our life, even though we were doing some work too. So I want to ask you one thing as we finish up. You can do something to help polar bears. It's my favorite thing. I'm going to ask you not to idle your car when you don't have to. So it sounds kind of strange. It's hard to get in the habit, but don't idle your car more than 30 seconds. So for example, if you're parked in a parking spot and texting, just turn your car off while you're texting. Instead of going through the drive-through, maybe park and go in. At first, it's really hard to do it, but once you start doing it and you see other people idling, it kind of drives you a little crazy. Why? Really quickly, anytime we use CO2, fossil fuels, cars, it releases excess CO2 into the atmosphere and creates a heat trapping blanket around the earth. And it is impacting sea ice for our polar bears. So just don't idle your car if you don't have to, and it's one way you can help polar bears. Another way you can help is you can go to polarbearsinternational.org, check out our information or donate, or you can go to what's close to my heart, my Party for Polar Bears fundraiser that I've been able to do with our Point Defiance AZAC chapter, and you can donate there and check out a little bit more about us. I want to thank you so much for having me today, even with the technical difficulties. You are awesome for being patient and waiting. It was such a pleasure to meet you all. And now if you have questions, I am ready to talk to you guys a little bit and get to interact with you.
All right, so thank you so much. Oops, I'm gonna have to, hopefully, let's try this. Nope, not any better. Readjust our size a little bit. Thank you so much for a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot about polar bears. I know that's something that's been on my mind recently. with, global warming and everything. So yeah. We have a question. In the zoo, how do you calm a polar bear if they get agitated? And that is from Priya.
I have never received that question before, and I think it's a really cool question. When you're working with these polar bears day in and day out, and I will tell you, they are my heart. I love them as if they're my family. We get a connection with working them. So different animals, you get different connections. But for the most part, because of the positive training and the positive reinforcement, we get connections with them. It's very infrequently that we have an agitated bear, but when we do, the first thing is to not react. We want to be calm because they will play off of that. Other times, if they were agitated, we could distract them with either by doing training and offering rewards. We could give them enrichment. We could move them to other areas. They have their dens where they feel very secure inside their den. And sometimes we can just walk away and give them some time to breathe. And I think that is a really cool question, and I hope that answers it.
All right.
What is my favorite part about working with polar bears? Everything. They're so cute. They're so smart. They're such incredible, strong animals. Everything is my favorite thing. But one of the things that I love the most about polar bears is their feet. Their feet are very cool. They have these black pads. Their skin is black. They have these black pads on the bottom of their feet. And they have little tiny suction cups that helps them to keep from slipping and sliding when they're out on the sea ice. It's a really hard question to answer, but truly everything about them is my favorite.
Yeah, so I think the
Okay.
next one, is about what happened to the other polar bears in the circus. Were they rescued or
Sorry,
not?
I meant to add that in there. There were 7 bears. One of them died in transport because she was in such bad shape. The other bears went to 3 U.S. accredited facilities. One of the females even gave birth to a cub after she was rescued. They all lived out a beautiful life in the zoos with their keepers. But I will tell you, in many cases in the bears, when they did necropsies, they found that all of them had fractured skulls from them being hit by the people in the zoo and the Mexican circus.
Oof. All right.
It was
The next
bad,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, that's not good. What are the other common diseases that polar bears get affected by?
That's a really great question. And one of the other things that you see in bears, and this is mostly older bears, is they have kidney disease. And so nutritionists, veterinarians, scientists are constantly working to better understand if this is a nutrition issue or if it's from old age. So that is another prevalent illness that you will see in polar bears. Other than that, they are susceptible to the flu like us. Like I said, we tried to test Blizzard for flu, but they're not a ton of things out there that I know of. I'm sure there's more, but those are the ones I know the best.
All right. And then the next question is, on average, how far has a polar bear been tracked, distance-wise?
You guys are asking the most incredible questions. So they have tracked a female who went 427 miles without stopping. She had to swim and cross a long spans, and then she had to continue walking once she got on land. She did it in 9 days and 9 nights without stopping. And that is the longest that we know of so far.
And so, if she did this distance in 9 nights, like when she's swimming, she can't sleep, right?
No,
Wow.
I don't want to tell you the sad part, but she had a cub with her, and the cub did not make it.
Oh,
She swam the whole time, and she continued going until she got onto land. But that is how the sea ice is affecting them. They're having to swim way longer to find sea ice.
wow. How do you train a polar bear?
So the example I like to use is think about how you train a dog. You train a dog, you ask them to sit. So when we train a polar bear, let's say we're going to train them to ask them to sit, but we have to do it with a barrier. So it's a little more challenging and it might take a little longer. So we used either our hand as a target and we'll have them touch their nose on our hand, or we might hold it up by their paw and we reward them over and over again. We might catch them in the sitting position if they're like they came over to see us and sit. And that's called capturing the behavior. And we will reward them over and over every time we see them sit. Eventually, we would add the cue, the verbal cue, sit. And so it starts out as something very basic that has led us to be able to train them to do voluntary injections and to help us get the dye on them. And it's actually very simple. It's just more challenging to do it with their barrier. I hope that answers your question.
The next one is how far or how long, I guess, can they go without eating food then?
So in 2019, we saw them going 140 days. The moms can go an entire year without eating food as long as she got that 33% before the sea ice went away. Usually, a polar bear needs to eat a seal about every 8 days, depending on the seal size, in order to get through the winter and the next fall. I see a cool question that I can answer, but I think it was for you.
Well, go for it.
Yes, the bears actually were a traveling circus out of Mexico that went into Puerto Rico. And polar bears are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They are a marine mammal. And Puerto Rico is a territory of the U.S. So when Mexico traveled into Puerto Rico with those bears, they were able to confiscate the bears. They flew them to, I believe it was Houston, and one of our wonderful veterinarians at the time was on that transport to help all those bears get back to the U.S. And I can tell you that when Boris and Kenny came to us, they were lifeless. Their skin was not good. We weren't even sure they were going to make it. They wouldn't eat. And that first day they went into the seawater was the most beautiful day. And from then on, they had a beautiful life.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm glad to know for those of you that don't know, I'm from Puerto Rico originally, so glad to know that we could play a positive role in giving them a good home afterwards.
Absolutely. I love telling that story because I just think it's so special. Yeah. You guys, great questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, can I ask a few questions before we sign off?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When can we expect to learn more about the tracking for the male and the subadult polar bears and their migration and things like that?
You can go to Polar Bears International website and you can go to their polar bear tracker. During the pandemic, of course, with Canada's borders being closed, it was really hard to get some of the US researchers up there. But they were able to get some Canadian researchers to help them to put, I believe it was about 5 or 6 tags on wild polar bears, even in the middle of the pandemic. So they have already been seeing results with these trackers. And in zoos, there were 8 facilities that worked on this. And so far, the tracker has lasted 30 days. But if you go to polarbears.org, you can get more information and kind of follow this journey as it goes. And it will continue to go as it modernizes. Every year that I do some classes with Polar Bears International for my training, just when I think I know everything, it either changes or we learn more. So just go on there, check out the bear tracker. It's really fun and it's really cool. And then you can learn more about the 3M Burr on Fur study.
All right, great. Well, thank you again. I really enjoyed your talk today. I learned a lot and made me appreciate polar bears even more. And I'll try my best to be aware when I'm idling my car and I shouldn't be. So.
Great. Then my work is done and it's my pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will have one more science public lecture at the end of next month, the 4th Friday. And and hopefully we will be back to doing this in person in the fall. So thank you again,